Welcome back to Dark Side of the Mic, and today we're going to compare two Hypercardioid dynamic mics, both designed for broadcast applications. So we have the Neumann BCM 705 up against the vintage Beyerdynamic M59, and we'll jump back and forward between both of them throughout this recording. All the audio you hear will be unprocessed but normalized. And today I'm recording through my Mackie VLZ3 mixer at line level into my Zengo interface. I think you can say both of these mics are certainly less well known or certainly less well used in the podcast world. But having said that, I've recently been listening to The Bridge, 50 Years of Hip Hop on Spotify. And I noticed that on one of the Twitter videos they put out that they're using BCM 705s. And that really caught my attention. I'll say from the outset I know very little about hip hop, but the show itself is really very engaging. A great listen for anyone wanting to hear artists talk about their origins, their work and their influences. And I think the BCM 705 is a great choice for that show. One of the things I absolutely love about podcasts, microphones, recording is just being able to listen to the texture of different voices, well recorded. And on The Bridge, the BCM 705 really allows the passion of guests and hosts to really cut through with a bit of edge, a bit of aggression. It really suits the subject matter and that style of chat for that show. I'm not so sure something like the SM7B might have sounded too mellow or soft, I'm not sure. But do check it out if you can. I'll put links in the description for that. So both of these mics are hypercardioids, so that means the pickup pattern is much narrower than your standard cardioid, so more suited to situations where you want to pick up less sound from the side. So if I was to move the mic to 90 degrees, you can hear that it really falls off considerably. So you can imagine it would really block the bleed sound from a co-host or guest in the studio, for example. Now, the M59 was designed as a more dual-use mic for studio use and in the field as well. It's a handheld dynamic, so really quite directional again. So if I were to move it to 90 degrees, you get the sense of the fall-off there is really very severe. So it's a great option if you're using this in a TV reporter style situation, but you'd still have to be careful if you were conducting interviews with it to ensure you were pointing the mic directly at the source. That's why a lot of interview field mics have an omnidirectional pickup pattern, which is a bit more forgiving. Nevertheless, this would work equally as well in a multi-guest podcast studio, for example, for reducing mic bleed. Now, when we start to look at the frequency response, this is where these two mics start to deviate a little bit. The Neumann has been specifically designed for radio broadcast voice applications and has a fairly narrow frequency response that on the low end starts to drop off from about 200 Hz. And there's a double presence boost at 5K and 8K to add clarity in the top end. But then it starts to roll off from about 10K. So overall then it feels a lot more closed off and focused, which I think really suits voice applications. The low end roll off really means that you have to engage the proximity effect to add that smooth warmth to the low end. So in my opinion you really need to be about 2 inches off the mic to get that. But from about 4 or 5 inches, if I were to move back off it just now, it really begins to thin out considerably. By contrast, the M59 has a much wider frequency response that extends to around 16 kHz. The mic uses a large diaphragm macrolon element. There's neodymium magnets in there to provide that extension and a faster transient response. So in the top end there's just a single smooth presence boost, and it sounds much more airy and open in contrast to the Neumann, I think. So in that sense this would work really well in instruments as well as voice. And the bass response, well, the bass response is really quite fantastic, really very tight. I think that's something that Beyerdynamic are absolutely superb at. It's just a low end. You're able to dial in your sound using proximity, and you get this gradual and subtle increase in warmth and bass response as you get closer to the mic. Overall, I think it sounds really very full and balanced directly out the box. So on to some final thoughts then, and at this point I've turned on some processing on the Neumann, and I think we should say that I think the BCM 705 provides the ideal bass layer response or sound to then add processing onto a voice recording. And that's typically what would be happening to this mic in a radio studio through the outboard gear in those kind of broadcast environments. And as you can hear, you can really make your voice really pop in the style that's reminiscent of that golden age of broadcasting. It's a fairly warm, punchy sound, and it's absolutely brilliant for that. In terms of build quality as well, this is by far the most impressive mic that I own, but seeing as it's a $700 mic, then so it should be. And I think you have to ask yourself, are there other options out there that can do a similar job in terms of sound, but for much, much less? By contrast, I just paid £40 or $50 for my second-hand M59, and I have to say I'm absolutely blown away with it. It must be 20 to 30 years old, and it really goes to show you that the technology around dynamics hasn't really moved on that much, if at all, in all those years. Maybe that's just the limits of moving coils and transformers, and neodymium isn't new either, it's been around for a while. But do things with dynamics really need to move on? I think the sound that I'm getting out of this vintage Beyerdynamic is really quite fantastic. It's warm, articulate, and really incredibly smooth out the box. Certainly better than a lot of newer dynamics that you can buy today. But what do you think? What's your favourite vintage dynamic, your hidden gem if you like, that no one talks about? Let us know in the comments down below. So I guess that about wraps it up for this week. So until next time, do take care, and we'll see you again soon.